Sometimes, without realizing it, we carry more than we can handle, worries, commitments, relationships that no longer serve us. All of it weighs us down, and that weight isn't just in your mind. You feel it in your body, in your energy, in the way you face each day. Over time, we learn that happiness isn't always about adding more to our lives, but about letting go of what holds us back, what drains us, what no longer makes sense. But letting go isn't easy, especially when those burdens are tied to emotions, memories, or people you love. Today, we're going to talk about 7 things you might need to quietly remove from your life, without explanations, without guilt, to feel lighter, more at peace. These aren't dramatic decisions, but small steps toward a more authentic life, one that truly feels like yours again. My name is Gabriel, and if this is your first time here, I invite you to stay until the end. What you're about to hear might be exactly what you need to start making space in your mind, your heart, and your life. Let's begin. Number 1, other people's drama, even if you love them. Have you ever noticed how other people's worries sometimes become your own? It could be a child going through a rough time, a friend who can't seem to find a way out of their problems, or even a family conflict that indirectly involves you. When you love someone, it's natural to want to be there, to help, to support. But what happens when that love turns into a burden? When other people's problems start stealing the peace you work so hard to build? Carrying other people's drama is something many of us do without realizing it. We justify it, telling ourselves that our responsibility, that it's the right thing to do, that it's what's expected of us. But we forget that there's a difference between accompanying and solving, between supporting and taking control. When you cross that line, the price is often your own well-being. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Tranquility can only be found when we free ourselves from the weight of others' affairs." Sounds simple, right? But in practice, it's one of the hardest things to do, especially when it involves people you love. However, letting go doesn't mean abandoning them. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means recognizing that you cannot live other people's lives for them. I remember the story of Helen, a 70-year-old woman who had always been the backbone of her family. Every time one of her children faced a problem, she was the first to step in, ready to fix everything. When her youngest daughter went through a difficult divorce, of course Helen dropped everything, her time, her savings, even her health. For months, she dedicated herself entirely to being there, to being a refuge, to trying to mend the unfixable. But when it was all over, she wasn't just physically and emotionally exhausted. Her daughter told her something she never expected to hear. "Mom, I know you always want to help, but sometimes you make me feel like I can't handle my own problems." That comment made her reflect. In her desire to protect, she had unintentionally undermined her daughter's strength. In wanting to help, she had forgotten her own right to take care of herself. Helen realized that loving someone doesn't mean taking over their struggles, and that sometimes letting go is the greatest act of love you can offer. The Stoics teach us that everyone has their own path, their own lessons to learn. Epictetus once said, "We cannot want others to live as we think they should. We can only live our own lives with wisdom." And that includes learning to respect other people's battles, even when they hurt us. Imagine for a moment what your life would be like if you stopped carrying burdens that weren't yours. If you could be there for others without losing yourself in the process. You might feel guilty at first. That's normal. We've been taught that love means sacrifice. But no one tells us that sacrifice can turn into self-destruction. True love doesn't ask you to give everything until there's nothing left of you. True love is being there without imposing, supporting without solving, showing up without abandoning your own peace. Because only from that place of balance can you truly be of help to those you love. As humanist psychologist Carl Rogers once said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." The same goes for relationships. When you accept that you can't save anyone but yourself, you give others the freedom to save themselves. So ask yourself, how much weight are you carrying that isn't yours? How many times have you mistaken love for obligation, empathy for responsibility? Maybe it's time to let go, not out of selfishness, but out of love. Love for yourself and for others. Because when you stop interfering, you allow them to find their own way. And in the process, you regain something priceless, your peace. Remember, as Seneca once said, a man who is at peace with himself needs nothing from anyone. Take care of yourself, because only then can you truly take care of others. Number 2, the fear of rejection for saying no. How many times have you said yes when you really wanted to say no? Maybe you agreed to a favor you couldn't fulfill, an invitation you didn't want, or a responsibility that overwhelmed you. You did it because giving in was easier than facing the discomfort of rejection. But at what cost? Every time you say yes when you want to say no, you betray yourself a little. The fear of rejection is a weight many of us carry, especially with the people we love. We don't want to disappoint them, seem selfish, or risk losing their affection. But this need to please others, to meet external expectations, often becomes an emotional prison that distances us from our own needs. Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard put it perfectly: the door to happiness opens inward. This means that true fulfillment doesn't come from pleasing others, but from being true to ourselves. And being true to yourself means learning to say no when something doesn't resonate with you, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Let me tell you about Peter. At 68, he had built what seemed like a peaceful life, but he lived under constant pressure to please his family. If a friend needed help, Peter was there. If his son needed money, he found a way, even at the expense of his own well-being. One day, his grandson asked him to help with a move. Peter said yes, even though he knew his back couldn't handle heavy lifting. He ended up injured, unable to move for weeks. That's when he realized that his inability to say no wasn't just hurting him, it had also created a dynamic where everyone assumed he would always be available. Changing wasn't easy. The first time he said no, he felt a knot in his stomach. He feared his family would reject him, that they would think he was selfish. But what happened was surprising. Although there was some initial discomfort, his children began to respect him more. And Peter discovered something important. Real connection isn't about pleasing others. It's about being honest about what you can and want to offer. Learning to say no is an act of courage, not only because it challenges people's expectations, but because it forces you to confront your own fears. As researcher Breen Brown said, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Saying no with clarity can be the most loving thing you do for someone. When you say no, you give the other person a chance to find alternatives, to grow, and most importantly, to understand that your time and energy have value. Think about this. Every time you say yes out of obligation, you're stealing time from yourself, time that could be spent on what truly matters. Saying no isn't selfish, it's necessary. It's the only way to protect your well-being while also building more authentic relationships. Imagine how your life would change if you could say no without guilt, without fear of rejection. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but over time, you'll realize that the people who truly love you don't need you to say yes all the time to value you. In fact, your ability to be honest with yourself can strengthen those relationships. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you seek the approval of others, you will be their slave. But if you seek your own approval, you will be free." And freedom starts here, in the simple yet powerful act of saying no when you need to. Do it for yourself, because no one can protect your time, energy, and peace better than you. And remember, as Paulo Coelho said, when you say yes to others, make sure you are not saying no to yourself. Number 3, the paralyzing nostalgia for who you once were. Have you ever caught yourself thinking about how things were 10, 20, or 30 years ago? Maybe you were physically stronger, had more responsibilities, or simply felt like you had a clearer purpose. Nostalgia has a curious way of trapping us. It shows us an idealized version of the past, making it seem better than it really was. But here's the problem. When you spend too much time looking back, you miss what's right in front of you. Nostalgia can be a refuge, a safe place to escape when the uncertainty of the present feels overwhelming. But it can also become a prison. When you idealize who you used to be, you start comparing it to who you are now, and that comparison is rarely fair. We judge ourselves harshly. I used to be able to do this, and now I can't. I was more useful. I was more attractive. I was more needed. But is it really fair to measure our worth only by who we were in the past? Seneca once said, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." When we cling to the past, we suffer twice, once for what we think we lost, and again because we deny ourselves the chance to enjoy what we have now. The present can never compete with an idealized past. Memory is selective. It remembers the good but filters out the struggles. Maybe you don't feel as strong physically today, but you have wisdom you didn't have before. Maybe your life is no longer filled with constant commitments and deadlines, but now you have time for yourself, for reflection, for learning. The present can feel uncomfortable because we don't always know what to do with it. But that's what makes it powerful. It's a blank canvas, an opportunity to reinvent yourself. Instead of looking back with longing, what if you look forward with curiosity? Not as someone trying to reclaim what's gone, but as someone open to discovering what's still possible. Nietzsche once said, "Without music, life would be a mistake." And he wasn't just talking about literal music. He was referring to our ability to find beauty and rhythm in what we do, even in the simplicity of a quiet day. There's music, but to hear it, you have to be present. You won't find it in a past that no longer exists. You might be wondering, how do I stop clinging to the past? The answer isn't to forget, it's to be grateful. Be grateful for who you were, for what you accomplished, for the people who are part of your journey. But don't stop there. Remember that your life didn't end in those moments. What you have now, even if different, also holds value. Every stage of life brings something unique, and what you have today, this very moment, is a gift that the past cannot offer you. Because, as Eckhart Tolle said, the present moment is all you ever have. Make the now the primary focus of your life. Stop looking back as if the best has already happened. You're still here for a reason. There are still experiences to live, laughter to share, lessons to learn. It doesn't matter if your body isn't the same or if your circumstances have changed. What matters is that you are here, with the opportunity to make this moment count. Nostalgia isn't bad, but don't let it steal your present. Because who you are now, with everything you've lived and learned, is more valuable than you've ever been. And that deserves to be celebrated, not compared. If you're enjoying this video so far and feel like you're discovering new ways to let go of what no longer serves you and live with more clarity, energy, and purpose, I invite you to subscribe and hit the like button. It helps me continue creating valuable content for those looking to navigate each stage of life with more peace and authenticity. Tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Stay until the end, because lesson number 7 might be the key to living with more serenity and fewer worries about what you can't control. Let's keep going. Number 4, emotional dependence on your children. There comes a time in life when our children are no longer little. They become adults with their own lives, decisions, and priorities. For many, this change is hard to accept, especially when their paths take them further away or when they don't respond with the closeness you hoped for. In these moments, it's easy to fall into an emotional trap, dependence. That feeling that your well-being depends on how often they reach out, how much time they give you, or how much they validate your place in their lives. It's natural to want to be important to your children. But when that desire turns into a constant expectation, the relationship becomes unbalanced, not because they are selfish or ungrateful, but because life moves forward. And as it does, you also have a path to follow, one that exists independently of theirs. Epictetus once said, "Nothing in the world has power over you unless you allow it." When your happiness depends on what others do or don't do, you're giving them a power they were never meant to have. This doesn't mean you should be indifferent or that your love for your children is any less important. It simply means that your worth cannot be tied to their approval or their constant presence. Emotional dependence on your children doesn't always show up in obvious ways. Sometimes, it's a passive-aggressive comment when they don't call enough, a subtle guilt trip disguised as concern, or the emptiness you feel when weeks go by without hearing from them. But here's the truth. No matter how much you wish things were different, the only person who can fill that void is you. When you stop expecting your children to fulfill every emotional need, something surprising happens. You start finding fulfillment elsewhere, in your own interests, in new relationships, in projects you may have set aside. Because love for your children doesn't have to be tied to dependence. You can love them deeply while also freeing them from the responsibility of being the source of your happiness. A healthier relationship is built when both sides have the freedom to simply be, you to live your life fully, and them to build theirs without guilt or pressure. As Khalil Gibran wrote in The Prophet, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you but not from you, and though they are with you, they do not belong to you." This doesn't mean you have to accept distance or lack of communication without feeling anything. It means you can love without demanding, be present without depending, and cherish time with them without making it the sole source of your happiness. Think about this. How would your life change if you stopped expecting your children to give you something only you can give yourself? You might discover that this kind of freedom benefits not just you but also your relationship with them. Because love, when freed from expectations, becomes a stronger, more genuine, and longer-lasting bond. So set them free, and set yourself free. Love them without conditions, without attachments that exhaust you, without expecting them to fill spaces that you can transform into opportunities for growth and purpose. By doing this, you're not only taking care of yourself, but also nurturing the relationship you value so much. Because, as Marcus Aurelius said, what matters is not what happened, but how you interpret it. And perhaps, by shifting your perspective, you'll realize that love for your children doesn't need to be dependent. It only needs to exist. Number 5, objects that carry more emotional weight than practical value. I want to share something that happened to me a few years ago. I was helping an older friend organize his house, and as we sorted through a box full of old things, he picked up a small porcelain figurine and held it in his hand for a long time. Then he said, "This belonged to my mother. I've kept it all these years because it reminds me of her. But honestly, I don't even like it. I don't even know why I still have it." That moment made me think, how many things do we hold on to, not because we need them, not because they bring us joy, but because letting them go feels like a betrayal of the meaning we've assigned to them? I've fallen into that trap myself. I once kept an old book for years, a gift from a friend who was no longer in my life. It wasn't a book I had ever read or even a topic that interested me. But every time I saw it, I felt a pang of guilt at the thought of getting rid of it, as if doing so would erase something important. Until one day, I realized something. It wasn't the object I was holding on to, it was the emotion. But that emotion wasn't inside the book, it was inside me. I know letting go of certain things isn't easy, especially when they are tied to moments, people, or times that will never return. But what I've learned is that keeping objects out of emotional obligation doesn't connect us to the past. It traps us in it. It forces us to carry a weight that, in many cases, doesn't even bring us anything positive. Seneca once said, "No wind is favorable for the one who doesn't know where they are going." And he was right. Sometimes, these objects are like anchors that keep us from moving forward, tying us to a version of ourselves that no longer exists, to a time that will never return. But we don't need objects to remember. What truly matters already lives within us. The day I decided to give away that book, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I had forgotten that person, but because I understood that the memory remained with me, even without the object. It was a reminder that love and memories don't need things to survive. If there's something in your home, in your life, that you feel is just taking up space, pause for a moment and ask yourself, does this truly bring me something, or am I holding on to it because I'm afraid to let go? Because sometimes, what seems like a small action, letting go of an object that no longer serves a purpose, can free up much more than we realize. This isn't about getting rid of everything or eliminating what truly brings you joy. It's about keeping only what makes sense, what still connects you to your present, not just your past. Because your space, just like your mind, deserves to be clear and at peace. Number 6, relationships that drain more than they give. There's something that happens over time. We start valuing quality over quantity. This applies to many things, but especially to our relationships. When we're younger, we often want to be surrounded by people, believing that more friends or more connections mean more happiness. But as we go through life, we realize that not all relationships nourish us. Some, in fact, do the opposite. They drain us. This isn't about blaming anyone. Many of these relationships aren't obviously toxic, but they are unbalanced. Maybe it's someone who only shows up when they need something, but is never there when you need support. Or maybe it's someone who constantly criticizes you or makes you feel inadequate, even if they don't realize it. The problem is that when you allow these relationships to remain in your life, you end up carrying an invisible weight. And that weight doesn't just drain your energy, it also affects how you feel about yourself. Because whether we notice it or not, the emotional environment we live in deeply influences our mental and even physical health. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "The most important relationship you have is with yourself." And it's true. If you let relationships that drain you take up too much space, you're not just sacrificing your peace, you're also limiting your ability to grow and thrive. The time you spend on people who don't uplift you could be spent strengthening meaningful connections, or simply enjoying your own company. Think of it this way. Imagine a garden with beautiful flowers but also overgrown weeds. If you don't remove the weeds, they will take up space, steal the sunlight, and absorb the nutrients the flowers need. That's exactly what draining relationships do. They are not necessarily bad by nature, but if left unchecked, they can suffocate the best parts of you. The good news is that you don't always have to cut these relationships off completely. Sometimes, setting clear and firm boundaries is enough. As psychotherapist Carl Rogers put it, true freedom comes when we stop living to meet others' expectations and start living according to our own needs. Maybe you have a relationship with someone you love deeply, but they constantly bring drama, negativity, or problems into your life. You can still love them, but from an emotional distance that protects your peace. You don't have to be available all the time. You can choose when and how to engage. It's also important to surround yourself with people who truly add to your life, people who listen without judgment, who celebrate your victories, who inspire you. Even if those connections are few, they have the power to transform your outlook and fill you with energy. Seneca once said, "Choose your friends carefully, for they will be the reflection of your spirit." Sometimes, life pushes us into solitude, and that can be scary, but solitude isn't the enemy. It's an opportunity to rediscover yourself and strengthen your relationship with who you are. From that place of strength, you can decide with clarity which relationships deserve your time, and which ones you're better off letting go. So ask yourself, who in your life leaves you feeling lighter, happier, more like yourself? And on the other hand, who leaves you feeling exhausted, insecure, or trapped in a dynamic you don't want? These questions aren't easy, but the answers can change everything. At the end of the day, taking care of your emotional energy isn't selfish. It's necessary, because only when you're at peace with yourself can you truly give the best of yourself to others. And that, more than anything, is what creates relationships that are truly meaningful. Number 7, the need to justify yourself to others. One of the heaviest burdens we carry in life is a need to explain our decisions, our emotions, even our way of living, just to be accepted by others. Maybe you feel like you have to justify why you'd rather stay home than attend a family gathering, or why you choose to spend your money on something that brings you joy instead of saving for something others consider more practical. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself where this need comes from? Often, it's rooted in the desire to be understood, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. But when this need to justify yourself becomes a habit, you start depending on others' approval to validate your own life, and that inevitably makes you shrink. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But to do that, you need to stop living as if you owe everyone an explanation. You don't have to justify why you take time for yourself, why you distance yourself from relationships that no longer serve you, or why you prioritize your well-being over other people's expectations. Remember, your life is yours, and only you fully understand the reasons behind your choices. Others may judge from the outside, but they don't live your days, feel your emotions, or face your struggles. Explaining everything won't make them understand better. More often than not, it just drains your energy and reinforces the false idea that you need their approval. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If you worry about what others think, you will be their slave." And it's a powerful truth, because when you constantly justify yourself, you're allowing other people's judgments to dictate your inner peace. You're giving their opinions more weight than your own. This doesn't mean you have to be indifferent or arrogant. You can be kind, you can be considerate, but you can also say, "This is what I need, and I don't have to explain it." That is a form of respect, both for yourself and for others. Let's think of something simple. Imagine you decide to start a new hobby, something you've always been curious about but that seems unusual for someone your age. Maybe you want to learn to play an instrument, take dance classes, or explore a new language. You might get curious looks or comments like, "Why would you do that now?" Here's the key. You don't have to explain why. The only reason you need is that it excites you, inspires you, makes you happy. When you let go of the need to justify yourself, you regain your freedom. You start living from a more authentic place, making choices that bring you closer to who you really are. Yes, some people may not understand, but you're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be at peace with yourself. Ask yourself, How many times have you held back from something you truly wanted just because you were afraid of what others might think? Maybe you wanted to move somewhere new, change something about your lifestyle, or simply stop attending commitments that brought you nothing. Fear of judgment held you back. But people's opinions are temporary. Your peace of mind, on the other hand, can last a lifetime. Next time you feel the urge to justify yourself, pause. Remind yourself that you don't owe anyone an explanation. Your decisions don't need to be defended. They are yours, and that's enough. As writer Honor Eastman said, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. Those who don't understand your choices are viewing them through their own lens, not yours. In the end, living without justifying yourself doesn't mean ignoring others. It means being true to yourself, with both respect and confidence. Because when you allow yourself to live authentically, you free yourself from one of the most unnecessary burdens you can carry. And that kind of freedom feels like a deep relief, like coming home to yourself.